if you're like me, you're probably kind of sick and tired of watching the alternative media, YouTube, alternate media sites, the whole political battles, all the infighting, the factions, and the issues that get covered. It just seems like they're so monotonous. It's the same thing, kind of day in and day out, with no resolution. If we're going to see any significant change, this is my recent thinking about this. There's several issues that we're facing that are fundamental that we really don't talk about very much. But before we even go there, you look at how long it takes for society to undergo any kind of a change, whether for the better or for the worse. And what we see coming out of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and so on, we saw a continuous kind of movement in a certain direction. And I think there were signs, telltale signs, as well as obvious signs that we were degrading ourselves as a culture in some way, as a society. But it was just not enough to raise the alarm and to really get people to do much about it. And I'm not sure that there were people trying to address these issues, but there wasn't enough push behind it. We've got a country that's, in those days, we were probably in the 250 million range. Now we're 330 million. You can't change a society that quickly. So we are dealing with, the time it takes, and these are generational things. The other thing is we don't really understand the nature of the problem. We see that there's abuse, there's corruption, there's deception, there's malfeasance. We know the government is too powerful, and basically with that power they can abuse that power in so many cases. We also see that there's a sort of schism in society between those who seem to recognize this problem and those who don't. I think some of this is a maybe willful ignorance. There are people that stand to benefit by the status quo or furthering the status quo even more in the direction that it's been headed. And so they're really disingenuous. They don't want to talk about facts because they'll be forced to confront the delegitimacy of their idea or their philosophy. It's kind of like when you're dealing with a person who's just basically obviously done some wrong thing and is just going to deny it in the face of all evidence, in the face of every fact that's available. So people tend to, it's an issue of character, it's an issue of honesty. And so I'm not saying that everybody on one side is dishonest and everybody on the other side is honest, because I don't think that's true. This is really not a partisan issue. It's we see this really this imbued throughout our culture. It's in government. It's in both political parties. It's in all the institutions. It's in the judiciary and the the elected officials, as well as our education system. So across the board, we have this schism where the status quo is being defended by people that don't want to engage in an honest, genuine debate. And not everybody on the other side of this equation is possibly able to articulate these issues very well. A lot of it is ambiguous and sort of murky territory when you're getting into the issue of values and character and judgment and things like this. So it's very hard to have a debate between two parties if both parties aren't willing to sort of listen to common sense and reach some kind of common understanding and actually be intellectually honest about it and so on. So we're really dealing with a situation where we can't seem to, we're deadlocked, and there doesn't seem to be any good solution. Now we may see things change. We may see society overall slowly start to, we've seen some indication that there are changes afoot. We don't know how deep that consciousness raising has gone. We don't know if it's going to progress. We don't really know how much momentum there is. But just based on even the most, biased polling, we see how people, in some cases at least, look at Congress, people's approval rating of Congress is below 10%. So it's obviously there's at least some awareness. There's also, you see the polling on the media, the major media, and the news outlets, and their confidence level, and so on, and all that is really very low as well. Something probably in the same general area, 10, 12%, something like this approval rating. So people do understand there's issues. Now there's still going to be problems because there isn't an ability to reach common ground on what those problems are and what the cause of those problems are and how to fix them. And we see so much debate about the individual issues that we get sort of down into the weeds constantly. Just looking at some of these things on the screen here, I'm going to switch over, and these are just some of the articles that have come out in the last day or two. Here you have an article about a guy that's running for the Senate in West Virginia. Well, okay, fine, but this is out there, it's on Drudge as a significant issue and so on. But so many of these things are skirting the fundamental problems about, who do we elect? What's the process about getting them elected? Are the parties really acting in a representative way or a consistent way even with their own beliefs and so on? So again, you see this and you kind of just feel like throwing your arms up and going, I really don't care anymore. It doesn't really matter. We get a few people in Congress that are okay, but the rest of them are not going to be okay. So it's boring in a way. It's frustrating, but it's also kind of just monotonous. Another one here, we have this Baghdadi, the ISIS leader. They're trying to get him. But there's so much information we don't know, or facts that we don't know about the whole situation in Syria with ISIS, with Russia and Iran and Assad and all these people, and the military involvement and the different parties and what they're doing. There's just so much in Israel, and you've got a lot of people that take one extreme position on either for or against Israel, for or against Iran, for or against Assad, and so on. And rightfully so, people that are extremely critical of the United States policy in the Middle East for many years now. So again, we just don't seem to be able to keep the focus on fundamental problems. And so here again, okay, maybe we'll catch the guy, maybe we won't, but it's at some level we know it's not going to make any difference. Here we have another one with the Pentagon moves closer to swarming drones capability with new systems. Again, we're already concerned about some of this technology, the advancement, and a lot of it isn't even published. It's secret, or behind programs that are not even open to anybody. So, okay, we know that there's more military investment all the time. There's a $700+ billion budget that just went through. They don't talk about the waste. They just say we need a better military, or a stronger military, which I happen to agree with. But nobody wants to talk about waste. Nobody wants to talk about the military-industrial complex. They don't want to talk about how much money is getting skimmed off by these contractors, which I happen to know is going on all the time. And all the major contractors are just, war makes money. And so I just saw a TV show about, or an interview by the lady that was the producer, I believe, or the director of the Pentagon, or the Vietnam series. And again, they talk about what was going on in the public debate, but and how the young people were opposed to the war and so on, but they really didn't address the issue of what was really going on. Was there influence by those who stood to benefit by war, by the money that gets spent by the government, which we pay for, to perpetuate a war like Vietnam, or any other war for that matter? And they're just not going to go there. They're just going to act like, well, these are all geopolitical issues, and they're sort of sanitized that way. But it's not that clear. It's not that simple, and it's certainly not something we should just take on face value. I won't go through all these. Here's one, the judge on the Mueller case, and we hear this just constant in the major media, especially all the time. In fact, the alternative media as well. They're just talking about the Mueller case. They're talking about Michael Flynn. They're talking about the FISA court, all this stuff. It just goes on and on. Department of Justice, and the FBI, and yes, we know it stinks. We know the whole thing stinks. Regardless of what you think about Donald Trump, you feel like we're just eating ourselves up here and wasting time and money, and it's disingenuous. It's that we're being lied to by, especially by the Department of Justice, by people in government that are trying to protect themselves. But it just doesn't get any better. So, I mean, this is all kabuki theater, and we just get tired of it. Here we have, Giuliani says there'd be a 50-50 chance that Mueller subpoenas President Trump. Again, we're down in the weeds. It just doesn't seem to go anywhere. And then here we have Israel and Iran on the path to war, which may very well be the case. And there are, of course, opinions about, who is for the war, who's not, who's against it, who are the vested interests, which are all valid points. But again, they tend to get into polemics about, Israel and Mossad and the evil United States and everything. And I'm not justifying, these things either. I think there's plenty of issues here on every part of this equation. But the bottom line is, it seems like everybody that's involved in these issues at the level of control benefits, and the average person, whether it's people of the United States, the taxpayers, or it's the soldiers, or it's the citizens of these countries, they all pay a heavy price, especially the people that are, dying and suffering and being, slaughtered because of these political and economic situations that are going on. So really, it just seems like we're in a society that is kind of our value system and our culture has become debased. That is essentially the problem. No one thinks or reads seriously. And when I say no one, I'm obviously, being general there. There's obviously people that do think deeply and seriously and honestly about these things, but there aren't enough of them. And most people seem to be more or less just distracted and entertained, and maybe they're just resigned, but there just doesn't seem to be enough concern about it. So again, if you look at this from the long term, we may see these things get better, but in the meantime, it's difficult to really see how much we can do and how much, if you pay attention to this stuff, I think it's becoming almost toxic. It gets toxic to constantly hear the same things. For me anyway, I watch the Twitter feeds, or I watch the different articles and YouTube and alternative media news sites, and I just get sort of up to here. I just, frustrated and tired, and I just don't want to hear anymore. Although I still want to keep in touch with what's going on, I just find myself kind of fed up with the whole mess. So we're dealing with something that I think is even deeper than that, and this has to do with the fundamental character of the people in our society. I'm not saying that society is ever going to be perfect. You're not going to have, a society full of virtuous and honest and decent people. But when you have norms, when you have values that are just sort of become the baseline of your society, that are so debased, then I think we get to where we are now. And so the question is, can we really honestly fix anything when we're in this kind of debased condition? The Constitution is great. If we were living in accordance with the original meaning of the Constitution and the ideas, the American idea based on the founding principles, fine. But, I think the founders understood this as well, and there's many quotes about this by the founding era participants, was that you can't have a decent society, you can't have liberty, you can't have a functioning republic based on limiting the power of government when the people themselves are not holding up their end of the deal. So this is where we are at this point. We just don't seem to have the ability to get back to that point yet. We may get there at some point, but there's no guarantees. You don't even have to look in the history books to see what happens in other countries even today. the so-called banana republics. You look at Europe, they've got basically government in control of everything. You've got basically not very well maybe designed constitutions, and even if you did, I think you would have the spirit of those constitutions violated constantly, even as they are here, in order to shore up the status quo and to shore up the interests of people who want to benefit by the power of government and basically help the government get what benefits they can from them through taxes and through other benefits. You can also see in countries where, in France after the French Revolution, you had several different, churning of problems with, social upheaval, and even to the current day, I don't think there's an absolute agreement on anything in France. And we have countries all over the world now where there's constant turmoil and infighting and basically disunity of one kind or another, and it leads to nothing good. And so, are we going into a period where we look at what's happening now, and if this is the new norm, if this is what we're going to have for the foreseeable future, it doesn't really bode well for progress. So we have to see some kind of turning point here, which we may not see. We may see this can be a continual sort of death grip that both parties have. Those on one side trying to restore the society and the culture and the kind of government that we had, the role of government, the theory of government that we were founded on, and you have the people that want the other things, and they want more socialism, they want more government control of everything and regulation, and you just have even abuse of that system itself, the laws themselves. You can have people, the federal prosecutors, they can go after somebody, the political enemy. We've seen this with the Mueller probe and the FBI, Department of Justice, and you can have the whole bureaucracy of the government, which is really stands to benefit by a continuation of these things. And when somebody comes in that tries to counter that, they have essentially the whole body of government against them. And so you can have prosecutors going after a political enemy. They can find anything, they can find somewhere, somehow, where you've broken some rule or some law, and they can drain you of all your resources because it takes a huge amount of money to go to court. The federal government, the the Department of Justice has, between the FBI, the CIA, and so on, NSA, they've got a $35 billion budget. So people can just be ruined because they just can't defend themselves against this kind of power. And so, again, it's the spirit of the law, it's the principles of fairness and what's right and what's decent that we have to get back. And so that's really where we are. That's the fundamental issue. And it's unclear now if there's momentum to go in that direction or not. But I think that's where the debate is. It's not spoken, it's not addressed directly that often. It will be alluded to by individuals trying to talk about the deeper issue, the more fundamental issues. But there just doesn't seem to be any way to directly address it. And so that's why we're in this deadlock. We're in this period of just sort of not being able to see progress very well. And it's a wait and see game. I think if we can do whatever we can do, we try to participate and help the process. We can, make a small difference in some way, but it's going to take a tremendous amount of patience and stamina to go through this period of time, in my opinion. I think that's the message here.